Break-even analysis is a way to compare the costs of running a business and the revenue, the money that comes into the business, to decide if the business will make money and to work out how much they must sell of whatever their product is to start making a profit. The terms we need are P for our formulas, which is of course our profit. Now profit, we'll get all the rest of these. L is loss. You really prefer not to make a loss. And profit and loss depend on which is bigger out of your revenue or your costs. Now, the revenue is the income of the business, so the money that the business makes. The costs are what it costs to run the business and make the product. If the income is higher, then we've made a profit. If revenue is higher than costs, that means you've made a profit. If costs are higher than revenue, you've made a loss. And that's just whether you made a profit or a loss. To calculate profit, if your revenue was higher than the costs, then you go, yes, I get to calculate profit. And profit is just revenue minus the costs. So if you brought in $1,000 this week and it cost you $800 a week to run the business, then you made a profit. 1,000 minus 800 mean 200 profit. It's pretty logical. If your costs were more than what came in, then you made a loss, and then you go, I will calculate my loss by doing costs minus revenue. So the formulas are just opposite to each other, depending on which one is larger, so whether you're finding a profit or a loss. Now this is the starting point, because obviously we want to know how much I've got to sell to be starting to make a profit. And where you start to be able to make a profit is your break-even point. And the break-even point is when revenue equals costs, and after that you'll start to make money. After the revenue goes up over this break-even point, you'll start to make money. If you're just breaking even, you're not actually making any money, you'd probably prefer to be selling some more stuff. So the aim of what we call break-even analysis is to work out how many items do I have to sell to reach the break-even point to cover the expenses of the business. Now to do this, we've got to write a rule for our revenue and a rule for our costs and work out where they're the same. Because if revenue equals cost, that's our break-even point. There's two types of costs that we might have to consider. They're fixed costs and variable costs. Now fixed costs, it doesn't matter how much you sell or how much you make, this cost just keeps going. So they're the sort of things like your rent. You've got to rent your building. It doesn't matter if you didn't sell anything, you still have to rent your building. It might be the rates that you pay. It might be the wages, interest on loans, all this sort of stuff. These costs are the same every week or month or year. We won't usually ask you to add all the different sorts up. We'll just say this business has fixed costs of this much, and it's that much every week. So fixed costs the same per unit of time, no matter how much you sell. Variable costs change in proportion to how much you sell. These are things like the cost to make the item, the production cost. Buying the item in order to sell it, or sales commission, etc. So this is, if I sold one thing, well, I had to pay to make that one thing. If I sold 100 things, I had to pay to make those 100 things, whatever they might be. And so these costs change in proportion to the number of units sold. And so usually we won't tell you, oh look, there's these 5 different variable costs. We'll just say, look, the variable costs per, I don't know, I'm selling bracelets. The cost per bracelet is $1. Or the cost to make a wardrobe is this much, or whatever it happens to be. There's 2 types of costs. So we'll do an example of how we work through one of these questions. For example, a manufacturer of bookshelves sells them at an average cost. Now this is cost or price. This is not the wording's a bit dodgy here. So they get $110 when they sell a bookshelf. The cost of production is made up of 2 parts. Weekly fixed costs of $1,000. So it doesn't matter how many they sell, there's $1,000 just to run the business. And a variable cost of $25 per bookshelf. And they want to find how many I've got to sell just to break even. We want to sell more than that to make a profit, but our aim is to find the break-even point. So the steps you follow are you define the variables. Now we start with the number of the things we're selling, because they want us to find the weekly number of bookshelves. So that will be our X. And we say let X equal the number of bookshelves produced. And they said weekly, we say weekly. So first we define our X variable. This is what our costs and our revenue depends on. And it's produced, and we do always assume that we sell the number that we produce. So sales or produced, same thing really. Then you write a cost rule and you write a revenue rule. So, revenue rule is easiest. Your revenue equals $110 for every bookshelf you produce and sell. That is 110 times X. So your revenue rule is always a pretty simple rule. A number that you get for every X. Your cost rule is going to be in the form cost equals, whether we're using y equals mx plus b or b plus a plus bx. Fixed costs, let me write that in there in a different colour. Fixed and variable. So we're using these rules that we've been using all this time for straight lines. So the cost is $1,000 because that's fixed, so that just stays there, plus $25 per bookshelf as my variable cost, so that's going to be 25x. So you write a cost rule and a revenue rule, and remember, to break even, cost has to equal revenue. So now we're actually solving a simultaneous equation to find out when cost equals revenue at how many of X, how many bookshelves. So we let C equal R. And we say that C equals R, and we're solving this equation. Put your cost equation on one side, and that equals R, your revenue equation. And this is a pair of simultaneous equations which we'll solve to find out what X is. We need to get both lots of X to the same side, so we'll take away 25X from each side. I'm left with 1,000 equals 110X minus 25X, that's 85X. And I need X on its own, so I'm going to divide both sides by 85, and I will use a calculator for that. 1,000 divided by 85, 11.76. Now X is the number of bookshelves we've got to produce and sell every week to break even. If you only sold 11, you wouldn't quite break even, so you have to always round up to the next whole one. Therefore, 12 bookshelves must be sold or produced every week to break even. If they sell more than 12, they're making a profit. If they sell fewer than 12, they're making a loss. Now this is how to solve that algebraically. You can solve it graphically. We still have to write the rules, but then we graph them. I think I'll put that in a separate video. This one's got to 12 minutes. So our key focus is we're finding the break-even point. We have to have an understanding of whether we're making a profit or a loss. Our revenue and our costs are the same at the break-even point. Our fixed costs and our variable costs have to be taken into account. And the way you do it is you define X as whatever you're selling, the number of them. You write a revenue rule and a cost rule, fixed and variable costs, and you find the point where revenue equals costs.